I'm Rob Kellick, and today we're going to talk about SDS, Safety Data Sheets. In this particular instance, we need to understand that the terminology has changed from the old MSDS, Material Safety Data Sheets, to today we're supposed to be using SDS as our terminology. And people who have a regulatory oversight to that will understand if you've been trained, if you use the old method to identify chemicals, vice the new method. Now, the new method came into play in April 2012. Been a while. And we were supposed to have been trained since 2013 nationwide as a workforce to understand what we're dealing with this system. So what we want you to do is, before you start jumping into your company's SDS program, make sure that it's actually an SDS program. And a great way to do that is to look at the identifying materials on the outside of that program. If you're looking at stuff on the left-hand side, the material safety data sheets, these are old indicators of old systems, and they need to be updated. They at least need to say SDS sheet on the outside. The best way to fix this, if this is updated and we're just using the old covers, just scratch out the material part and you're up to speed. It's that simple. So if they are up to speed and they just haven't changed that, that's a quick fix to get back on track. So today we're going to talk about your 16 sections. And the 16 sections of an SDS sheet, which is now standardized throughout the world. Everybody in the world utilizes these as a chemical manufacturer to help us as users identify these hazards and these precautions before we actually utilize that chemical. So we're going to talk about the first 8 sections in this segment. In the next segment, part 2, we're actually going to talk about sections 9 through 16 and how to utilize those properly. So identification of hazards you're going to find in the first section. Section 1, this is where we're going to take our chemical of concern with the label on it, and we're going to match that information with section 1 of the SDS sheet. They should match perfectly, and understand that the numbers should cross-reference. Chemical manufacturers are going to be found here, the name of the product, the type of the product, manufacturer's information, some CAS, numbering systems. That's just a chemical identifier that's been put through the process of identification, so it's not that important, but is a number of reference if it's on there. And then part numbers, product numbers, you might find on the label, will also find in section 1. So these are mechanisms to help you understand that the chemical concern that's in your hand, now you have the documentation for the details about those concerns. So section 2 is going to be your hazards for your identification of how your body is going to react to that overexposure. And what we're talking about is, if you get it in your eyes, how are your eyes going to react? Are you going to tear up? Are they going to swell up and blow up? You know, the extreme. But you're talking about irritations, you're talking about respiratory problems, things of that nature, and how your body's going to react to an overexposure. Section 3 is going to break it down into ingredients, what we call components. Now, each component has its own SDS sheet. It is an individual chemical, and therefore is required to have an SDS sheet accordingly. So these are cross-references we can use as managers to identify certain applications or chemistry issues for future applications. So if it's just an interest for you as the end user, it's available. This is what it's made of, and proportionally what's used more than the other. So they kind of break it down in percentages for you. Section 4, this is going to be your first aid section. This is the section that will actually countermeasure your section 2. So if you're overexposed and you got tearing eyes, what do? Go to section 4, look under eyes, countermeasure, flush with water 15 minutes as an example. Then you know what to do ahead of time, so to counter that exposure. Section 5 is your firefighting section. Now this is a complex system because not only does it tell you if it catches fire, but it tells you what conditions it takes for that fire to exist and the resulting class of fires. And we're going to talk about fire classification and fire protection in another segment. But there are 5 classifications: A, B, C, D, and K. And we'll talk about that in more detail when we get there. So it also tells you how to extinguish it. And if you've got a certain kind of fire, you're going to need a certain kind of extinguisher. And again, we'll get to that in more detail in fire protections. So section 5 also tells us the amount of fuel it takes to be in the air for the fire to exist. And that would be either a UEL or an LEL, LFL, and that is lower flammable limit or lower explosive limit. So those are telling us that this is the minimum amount of fuel to air mixture it takes for those conditions to exist. And then you have your upper ELs and FLs. So that's the maximum amount of fuel that is in the air for fuel to actually burn in that condition. Once you go beyond that, it's too rich, it won't burn substantially. If you go below the LFLs or UFLs, that's telling you it's not rich enough to sustain flames. So in that zone, that's your flame zone, that's what we would be concerned about. And then the ignition temperature it takes for that chemical to off-gas enough to have what we call a flash fire, something that burns for less than 5 seconds and goes out, or you have an ignitable fire, something that continues to off-gas and continue the burning process. So again, that's going to tell us what those temperatures would take for that material to get to in order for that to exist. So section 5, like I said, is a little complex, but we'll get more into that in fire protection sections. Section 6, if you've got accidental release measures, you want to know this ahead of time. Please read this. It lets you understand if this does get away from you and uncontained and uncontrolled, you can expect these results. And it can be simple as, scoop it up, put it in the trash, to run, and everything in between. So make sure you understand your countermeasures and the materials and processes that you need to have in place before you use this chemical in your project and your applications. Section 7, this is going to be your storage and handling section. It tells you where you can put it, under what conditions, and make sure that those are being met, because you can either destroy the material or cause undue harm to others because of the conditions themselves. Section 8, this is your engineering controls. In our final section here, this is going to tell us what ventilation requirements that you have to have in place and to what level that ventilation must be effective. And it also gives us our personal protective equipment information. Now, if you look on a label of your container of the material that you're concerned about, you will see that it says wear gloves, wear goggles, wear respirator. Well, how many gloves are out there? How many goggles are out there? How many variances of filters can go onto a respirator? We're talking dozens and dozens. Which one is it? Well, you're not going to get that on the label. You got to get that in Section 8, and this is where you're going to find that information. Again, please review these 8. If you have any questions, please give us a call or concerns. That's what we're here for. And if you have any other issues when it comes to chemicals, stop, ask questions, because one mistake could be the last mistake you make when it comes to chemicals. Now, as always, safety is not a mindset, but a state of mind. So be safe out there, and we'll see you soon.